Good morning. Let's get right to it. Here's your Executive Intelligence Summary for February 16th, 2026. All right, here's what's on the agenda today. We'll start with the big AI summit in New Delhi, then we'll hit some major updates on governance and corporate intelligence, and we'll wrap up with an editorial take and a quick look at the markets. So let's dive in. So our lead story today is a big one, the AI Impact Summit 2026, which is kicking off in New Delhi. You know, the Indian government is really framing this as a huge deal. It's the first major global AI summit to be hosted in a global South country, and the goal here is pretty clear. They want to totally rebalance the global conversation around AI governance and where the investment is flowing. And wow, the sheer diplomatic and corporate firepower they've gathered is something else. We're talking about a goal to position the Global South as a real leader in AI. You've got about 20 heads of state showing up, plus delegations from over 45 countries. And on the tech side, it's a who's who. We've got Pichai, Altman, Amadei, all of them. And it's all tightly woven into these high-level diplomatic meetings, like the Modi-Macron bilateral. And let's talk about the scale here, because it is just massive. They're expecting more than 250,000 visitors over the course of the week. This isn't just a conference. They're turning this into a massive showcase event. Yeah, and the density of the event totally matches that huge scale. Get this, over 3,000 speakers are scheduled for more than 500 sessions. So this isn't just some quiet meeting. It's more like a sprawling festival of ideas, really designed for mass participation. Okay, so the schedule for the week, it is meticulously choreographed to get the most impact possible. Today kicks things off with the India AI Expo inauguration. Then tomorrow, you've got this all-woman hackathon happening right alongside the Modi-Macron bilateral. The whole week just keeps building right up to a leaders summit, a big tech CEOs event, and then it wraps with a final session with Brazil's President Lula. It's just a non-stop, really high-stakes agenda. So what does all this mean? Well, this summit really puts a spotlight on the dual strategy India is playing right now. On one hand, they're stepping up as the global AI convener, pitching for investment and trying to take a leadership role. But on the other hand, they're also being a very tough AI regulator. I mean, right before the summit, they dropped these new rules with a super aggressive 3-hour takedown window for synthetic content. It creates this deliberate tension. It's like they're saying, come on in, world, but also, here are the very strict rules you're going to follow. Okay, let's shift gears now to macro, politics, and governance. We've got 3 key updates for you here. One on trade, one on regulation, and a pretty interesting proposal for institutional reform. First up, trade. There's an interim US-India deal that's basically hitting the reset button on tariffs. The old tariff, which was a whopping 50% from the US, is being slashed all the way down to just 18%. Now, that is a huge shift, and it comes in exchange for India making some concessions on industrial and agricultural goods. Next, let's talk regulation. The number you really need to pay attention to in India's new AI rules is this: 3 hours. Yep, just 3 hours. That's the new deadline for platforms to take down any AI-generated or manipulated content once they get a notice from the government or a court. That's way down from 36 hours. So you can imagine, this just drastically compresses the time they have for review and seriously ramps up the compliance pressure. And finally, there's this really interesting proposal for institutional reform floating around, the creation of something called an Indian Scientific Service. And the whole idea, which is kind of captured in this quote here, is that since modern government is so tangled up with technology, you need to structurally integrate scientific expertise into policymaking, not just have it on the side as a consultant. All right, shifting over to the corporate sector, we're tracking some key developments across 3 different industries: AI infrastructure, space tech, and a pretty major shockwave that's hitting IT services right now. So first, in AI infrastructure, the firm NISA is reportedly gearing up to raise a massive $1.2 billion. And huge driver for this is a reported tax holiday on cloud services that goes all the way until 2047. That's seen as a really crucial incentive to get India's data center and compute capacity built out. But that funding environment isn't the same everywhere. Over in space tech, a startup called Dhruva Space is apparently struggling to get large institutional investors on board for its $15 million funding round. And that challenge is only made worse by the fact that they recently lost their satellites in a failed rocket mission. It really just highlights how high risk this whole sector can be. Okay, now for what might be the biggest market mover of the day, a major shockwave hitting the Indian IT services sector. Just look at this. The Nifty IT index has plunged 14% this month alone. That is a significant valuation shock. So the big question is, why? Well, the core of the problem really comes down to revenue concentration. See, a huge chunk of the money from major Indian IT firms, we're talking between 40 and 70%, comes from application services. And the market is now looking at that core business and seeing it as structurally vulnerable to being disrupted by all these new AI tools that can automate what used to be really labor-intensive tasks. All right, turning to the opinion pages, Vivin Sharan has a pretty sharp analysis of the government's new AI rules, and he's really focused on the timing and the design of them. Sharon's argument is that the timing is absolutely not a coincidence. Releasing these really tough new rules just days before a huge global AI summit, he says that's a deliberate act of strategic signaling. It's a way for India to show the world that it's taking the potential harms of AI very, very seriously. But here's the central critique, and it's captured perfectly in this quote. The argument is that by shrinking that takedown window to just 3 hours, the rules create this really powerful incentive for platforms to just comply first and ask questions later. This basically collapses any space they have for careful review, especially when you're talking about complex stuff like political speech or satire. Okay, let's wrap things up with a quick snapshot of the verified market numbers. So, to quickly summarize the key market metrics for you, in Indian equities, that Nifty IT index is really reflecting the anxiety we talked about. It's down 14% for the month, and that 40 to 70% exposure to application services is now clearly being flagged as a major structural risk. In foreign exchange, the rupee is still on a directionally negative path over the last 12 months. And on trade policy, the big move is still that significant drop in U.S. tariffs on Indian goods, all the way from 50% down to 18%. And that concludes today's briefing.